Hi, this is Carson with Troy, and I have with me Brian Lee Durfee, who is the author of the Five Warrior Angels trilogy. He is a wildlife and fantasy artist, and he is a YouTuber who does book reviews and other stuff. Brian, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and about your book series.
Okay, yeah, like I was introduced, my name is Brian Lee Durfee. I'm the author of The Forgetting Moon, which I'm holding up here, and The Blackest Heart, both books published by Simon and Schuster's Saga Press. Book 3, The Lonesome Crown, is coming out November 29th of 2022, so in about a month and a half. And so that's my big claim to fame. I also used to be a wildlife artist, and I used to do illustrations for Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons game, among a lot of other clients. And then I also do a YouTube channel where I review books and give writing advice. And that's pretty much it. My day job, all of those things that I mentioned are my hobbies that I make some money off of. My day job is I am a sergeant at the Utah State Prison. And I currently, I've worked in the mental health unit, the gang unit, the intake unit. I've ran the prison libraries for about 5 years, and now I currently teach life skills to the inmates in the maximum security unit.
That's fantastic. I was a corrections officer once upon a time, and I know how valuable that stuff is. Um, One of the things that the inmates looked forward to the most was our day was for the library was Friday, and we had the public library come down, and it's something that their faces lit up. They were able to get some respite from the humdrum of prison life, and so for you to do all that stuff and to teach life skills, I think is amazing. What let's talk about your book series right now. What was the genesis for the story?
Oh man, that started when I was just a kid. I was about 12 or 13 years old, and I was in a bookstore. I grew up in Sevier County, Utah. For those people that don't know where Sevier County, Utah is, it's about as remote as where you're from. Uh, it's a small desert community. Uh, Nothing much goes on. We didn't have any real bookstores. We had sort of a school library, a bookmobile, things like that. But I was never really interested in books. I just grew up on a farm, working on the farm. And I remember one day I was in Salt Lake City in a bookstore, and I ran across a copy of The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. And something about it, just the cover image just leapt off the bookshelf at me, and it spoke to me in some way, and I was just mesmerized by the cover. And so I bought it. That was the first ever spur of the moment purchase I'd ever made that was of a book, with my own money. And I think my parents were a little bit like, well, what is this thing you've bought yourself? And I just started reading it, and about 80 or to 90 pages into the book, I was so captivated by what I was reading that I just knew immediately that I wanted to do something similar with my life, write books. And if not write books, then illustrate books, because that cover illustration was done by the classic fantasy artists, the brothers Hildebrandt. And so I was like, well, I'm either going to be a fantasy artist or a fantasy writer. And I ended up becoming both. So that was the genesis of the story. I started taking notes immediately when I was a kid of different things I wanted to have happen in the books that I wanted to write. And I just always kept those notes throughout my life, just with a dream to write. I got into my late teens and never really wrote anything. I got into my early 20s and never wrote anything. My late 20s, I was still procrastinating the dream. It wasn't until I hit about 30 years old that I was like, I should really gather up all those years worth of notes that I've been taking and make something out of it. And I still kept procrastinating it. It's a couple years went by. I was cleaning carpets part-time. I was doing my artwork part-time, struggling to get by as a starving artist. And one day I was cleaning carpets with one of our clients was John Stockton, who used to be the point guard for the Utah Jazz. And this would have been right towards the tail end of his career, might have been the last season that he played in Utah. But I was cleaning his carpets, and he was a regular client of ours. And I was in his den, and he was sitting at the desk in his den, and I noticed he had I'd noticed his book collection several times prior when I'd been in the house, and he had a lot of books like Tom Clancy and like Lonesome Dove, and a lot of thriller novels, and like the Da Vinci Code and things like that. And I just started a conversation up with him about those books, and we had a pretty good conversation about the different books we loved. And then I just made the offhand comment, well, I always dreamed of writing books someday. And he said, well, why haven't you? And I couldn't stop thinking about that. The whole rest of the day, I was just thinking about, why haven't I? Why haven't I? That night, I actually got out my typewriter at the time. I mean, I didn't have really a laptop. I mean, laptops existed, I just didn't have one. And I just started typing away on my first novel, and I've been writing every day since. So that's kind of the genesis. And I did the whole John Stockton story. I did include that story in the acknowledgement pages of this book here, but in a much briefer form.
I was hoping you would mention that story, because that one question that John Stockton asked you, why haven't you, that can cut deep to somebody who has procrastinated. Like me, I wanted to write a book. I started writing my first book in 2002, but I still haven't published one. And that when I read that in Black Blackest Heart the first time, it was like, you know what, maybe I should like do something. And I've wanted to do a podcast like this, or some sort of interview format, whether that's written word or podcast or whatever, for a long, long time. And that story right there, after I read it, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to reach out to people and see if I can get interviews. So like, not only has that story with John Stockton helped you, but it has helped other people as well. So I'm glad that you included that in this interview. So thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. Like I said, sometimes inspiration comes from the strangest places. Like, I think anybody else on this planet could have said those very same words to me, and I just would have been like, yeah, whatever. But since it was John Stockton, I was like, here's a guy that made it to the top of his profession, against all odds. And in his mind, he's probably thinking, well, if I was a writer, if I wanted to be a writer, I'd be a writer, Like,
Right.
who is this stupid carpet cleaner that just has all these dreams and is still cleaning my carpets,
Yeah. No, and you said you took, you've been writing every day since then. How long did it take you before your novel came out? And then how many rounds of edits did you have to do?
Okay, that's a good question. And this is going to shock. Well, I've told the story before, but a lot of up and coming writers are a little bit shocked and intimidated by what I'm about to say. So I would say that conversation I had with John Stockton happened about 2002, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe 2003. I can't remember when his last season was with the Utah Jazz, but that's when it happened. And I mean, I started writing that day, and I started writing two separate books. I started writing The Forgetting Moon, and an epic horror novel that I wanted to write. I was trying to be like Stephen King. So I was kind of working on both of them back and forth for a couple of years. I finished the horror novel first, and then I started editing and re-editing the horror novel, because I'm like, okay, this one's done. I'm going to see if I can get it published. So I finished the first draft of that around 2004 or 2005. I edited it, not enough. I wasn't a very skilled writer or a very skilled editor. So I edited it like maybe 3 or 4 times, and then I started querying it, sending it out to different agents and editors in New York. And I think I sent like 100 queries out. I got 100 rejection letters on that book. There was a handful of the rejection letters, though, that came back with some pretty positive notes, like, hey, this is pretty decent. You're on the right path. You just need to polish up your writing a little bit. So that gave me encouragement to know that, hey, I wasn't wasting my time. And so I thought, well, now I'm going to go ahead and finish the fantasy novel, because I'd gotten pretty good way into The Forgetting Moon and I just needed to finish it up. So I finished it up probably around 2008, the first draft. Like I said, I was cleaning carpets at the time. I was working at the prison at the time. I mean, this is something that I was just doing. I wasn't in a hurry. I was doing it when I had free moments. I would try to write every day, but if there was 2 or 3 days to go by that I didn't write, I wasn't stressed about it. But, I was writing every week a considerable amount. And so I finished Forgetting Moon in 2008. And I was hesitant to query and send it out, because this was going to be my second huge novel that I'd written, and I didn't want the rejection. So I actually edited this. I went over it. I would say I did probably 30 to 35, maybe even close to 40 rereads of the entire book from start to finish, just tinkering with it and fixing things and making things as best as I could. So literally, I would say somewhere between 30 and 40 different edits. And that was about another 5 years worth of time I spent on it, from 2008 till about 2013 or 14. And then once I thought it was as polished as it could be, that's when I queried agents again. But this time, instead of sending it to 100 different agents, I just targeted the 6 most, I just figured out which agents in New York City represented big epic fantasy novels, like Robert Jordan's agent, Brandon Sanderson's agent, Tad Williams' agent, George R.R. Martin's agent, Steven Erickson's agent, everybody that had written a massive, Pat Rothfuss's agent, anybody that had written a massive, big, huge 1,000-page fantasy. Those were the 6 guys that I sent my queries to. And I got a query letter, for those people that don't know, is just an introduction letter introducing yourself to an agent, a literary agent, and then you send them, and the letter should only be about a page long, just briefly describing yourself in the book. And then you send the first 3 chapters of the book. And if they're interested in those first 3 chapters, they will request a full manuscript. So I sent 6 query letters with my sample chapters out to those 6 agents, and every single one of them asked for the manuscript.
That's amazing.
So I was like, wow, that was like, And then a few months went by, and I never did hear from a few of those agents again. Several of them called me back and offered me representation, and then I got to pick kind of which one I felt I vibed with the best. And so I signed with the agent that I signed with, and within months, he got me a book deal with a major publisher. So
that's a fantastic story. And you're right. It is intimidating, to write a book and then think, oh man, I got 30 to 40 edits to do. And side note, like you really don't. This is Brian's journey. Your journey might be a little different, but
yeah.
Brian, how did you stay motivated after getting 100 rejection letters from your horror novel?
I stayed motivated because I'd already been somewhat of a success with my artwork, and I knew that was not overnight. That also, just getting my artwork to the point where it was professional enough that people would hire me, like big companies would hire me, like Topps trading cards and Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering. Trying to think of some of the other people I did work for, and then not only that, but my wildlife art was selling at the time in some of the most prestigious Western art galleries in the world, in Jackson, Wyoming, and Park City, Utah, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so I knew just from my experience with my paintings that you might fail a lot and you might do 200 really, really bad paintings before you do one that's kind of good. And then you might do 200 more that are kind of good before you get sort of good. And then you do 200 more before you're sort of good. And then you do 200 more and then you're actually you're better. And then, by your thousandth painting, you're selling professionally, right? So I knew it was possible. So I knew that it's just a matter of time as long as I dedicate myself to the craft. And not only that, but I read, ever since I was 12 years old, I had read 4 to 5 books a week since I was just a kid. And I think that it was the biggest training that I ever had, because I've never taken a creative writing class or an English class, well, I've taken English classes, but I mean, in college we had English 101. That was as much as I ever got. I never did take anything about creative writing. My school in creative writing was just reading thousands and thousands of novels.
Mm-hmm.
And just if I gleaned anything out of that, that's what I used for my schooling, my education, was just other people's writing and figuring out, I mean, if you were a voracious reader, you can be a good writer. You really can. If you don't read, you'll never be a good writer. And so I knew I had that going for me, is that I read a lot. So, and then I just knew that if I just kept doing it and kept doing it, like I said, everybody's journey is different. I tell some people that I did 40 edits on my book and they're like, whoa, dude, that's way overkill. And I said, well, you have to understand, I was starting at a point where I didn't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
And my first draft was real garbage. I mean, like serious garbage. And I had to do 40 drafts just to fix all of that garbage. And other people that are more talented than me, they might only need 2 or 3 or 4 drafts. I know, like Robert B. Parker, towards the end of his career, he wrote like some 150 some odd novels, and he was getting so good that he was just turning in his first draft to the publisher. So like you said, everybody's journey is going to be different.
Right. No, and that's amazing. And I've learned so much from you already. Some tips or tricks for people who are listening. Things that you can take away from Brian so far is, don't get discouraged. Give it time, have dedication. You said you were writing, but not necessarily every day, but every week. Like have consistency. And if you have to do 30 to 40 edits, that's okay. It's easier to steer a moving car than a parked car. Get those words down on page, and you're able to fix them later. This is fantastic.
Yeah, another bit of writing advice I give is just exactly what you said. I didn't care how outlandish or outrageous my idea was. In that first draft, I stuck that in the book. Because it's not going to harm anything in the first draft. If I'm rereading it, maybe the second draft, I will be like, wow, that was a stupid idea. And so you'll just delete it. Or maybe it's not till the 6th or 7th time you read through your manuscript and you're like, well, that's idea just ain't working. You just delete it. It's not like you have to be married to it. And a lot of them I didn't delete. A lot of them I would write a scene or several pages or even whole chapters that just didn't work. Rather than deleting them forever, I have a file saved on my zip drives and computers of just things that I've written that didn't work and pieces of those, because I already wrote it. It's already my own writing. I just, once in a while, if I'm stuck for a little bit of something, a little bit of a description of a castle or a cave, I'll be like, oh yeah, I remember I wrote a pretty good description of that cave, but then I got rid of it, but I still have it. So I just copy paste and put it in another part of the story. So it's not like, even if you're deleting stuff, save what you deleted, and you might find you can use it elsewhere.
Well, I know that people have, well, Brandon Sanderson, he has taken old subject material, characters and stuff, and has reused them and created new stories from them. So what you said there is great advice as well. Like, don't throw away anything. Like, keep it. You might be able to use it later on. You mentioned earlier, Stephen King is a big influence, and anybody that follows you on social media knows that you love him. Besides him, I have a question about him. But besides him, who are some of your other influences?
Okay, when I was writing, there's several authors I like to emulate. Stephen King, of course. Robert McCammon, who's also a horror writer. Robert McCammon wrote Boy's Life, Swan Song, and a dozen more really good horror novels. I like his style. My favorite writer that I try to copy most is Larry McMurtry and his Lonesome Dove series. I know it's Western, but you could just switch the characters out. You could switch all of his cowboys out and make them knights in shining armor, and you'd have just an absolutely great action adventure novel. And I just love the way he writes, his cadence, his sense of humor, the way the characters talk to each other. I really tried to mimic that in my own novels as much as I can. Another influence is Tad Williams. I read a lot of fantasy novels when I was a kid, and it wasn't until I got into my late teen years that I started getting into Tad Williams, and that was the first writer that really made me appreciate what really good prose can add to a book, like lyrical sentences, how words fit together, how they sound when they roll off the tongue. I just thought his writing was so gorgeous, and I'm just like, man, this guy is writing at a level above everybody else I've ever read before. And that was the main influence for me, because I would just study everything he was doing. And so Tad Williams, who have I mentioned? Tad Williams, Larry McMurtry. I think George R.R. Martin also writes really well. It's almost flawless,
Right.
his writing itself. There are some scenes in some of his books that maybe the pace is lagging a little bit, but I still just love the flow of the writing.
Right. All of
Those
those
three.
are fantastic. I've read most of them, and you're
Yeah.
right. Like, Tad Williams, Larry McMurtry, George R. R. Martin. Anyway, all those guys are really great. Some of the best in the business. In fact, like Tad Williams, I think is kind of underrated in the fantasy readership. He has influenced so many people, and there's still a lot of people that I talk to that hasn't ever heard of, like, the Dragonbone Chair or any of those
Yeah.
other land series or whatever.
Probably more exciting. It was exciting to get my book deal, but I think the most exciting thing that ever happened to me was when I met Tad Williams and got to hang out with him for 3 days and become friends with him. And then, if anybody that has my second novel, The Blackest Heart, you can see that he gave me I don't know if that's even going to show up on your screen, but he gave a blurb for me, a recommendation on the front cover for my book. So to have like one of my literary heroes actually, say that I'm a good writer, and it's right there on the front of my own novel that he said that, is pretty cool. I think I was more excited about that than I actually getting an actual book deal.
No,
So,
that's exciting when one of your heroes, a dream come true, right?
yeah.
So I know that you love Stephen King. And here's my question about him. If you could emulate one quality of Stephen King's writing, what would it be?
Oh, I try to do that, and it's this. I think every Stephen King novel, well, most of them, because he has written short stories that don't do this, and he's written shorter novels that don't do this, but most of his novels, he and he gets criticism for this by a lot of people that don't appreciate him. but he will just take a character and just write about that character and some of the most mundane things that are going on in that character's life, and some of the most what you would think are so insignificant things. But that's where the magic of his characterizations are. Is that's why the people that love him for that, where he can take a character and flesh them out to the point where you know their whole backstory, their childhood, what their childhood was like, things that happened to them in their childhood, anecdotes of their marriage or their children, or how their parents raised them, um, funny little things that happened to them as they were growing up. All of this stuff piles up in a book, and that's why things like It and The Stand and Under the Dome and 11/22/63, some of these bigger books that he writes, like Needful Things, a lot of these books seem awfully bloated to people, and he gets a lot of criticism, like he's vomiting words out all over the page for no reason. But the people that love his writing love him because of that. And if there's one thing that I've tried to do is, especially when I was writing my horror novel, um, was I tried to add that kind of element to the story. Is just if there's a character in the story, I want him or her to like have a big storyline, like a backstory to them. And
It definitely fleshes out the character more, even the little mundane things, you know, brushing your teeth or starting a fire or whatever you're doing. Like it does flesh him out to make him a more realistic character part of you.
yeah, and sometimes Stephen King will just it's simple things, you know. You'll have a character who's a teenager sitting in his bedroom in a trailer park, and Stephen King will just describe the things on the kid's shelf, you know, a Superman thing, a P-51 Mustang model that he built when he was 9, or a jar of marbles, or a gumball machine, or all of the cassette tapes of the heavy metal music that he listens to. And he'll list off all of that stuff. And a lot of people are like, why am I reading a list of things in this boy's room? You know,
Right.
but you come to appreciate that character even more, because you know, hey, this is a character that's not just a character. This is a character that actually lives in this universe and has interests and goals and dreams and things that he collects. It just makes it seem more real.
Right. No, that's a fantastic quality to try to emulate. And you do that very well in you know, in your first two books, the Getting Moon and the Blackest Heart. So you said your third book's coming out. What are some of your writing habits now? That and how has that changed throughout your journey?
So the Forgetting Moon, the first book, like I said, I was in no rush to do it. I was under no deadlines. I could work on it when I felt like it. So it took me quite a while, you know, and you know, it took me 10 years or some odd to from start to finish. Not only, I guess, even more than that, because I started taking notes for the book when I was 12 years old, you know.
Right.
Once I got the book contract for 3 books, there were deadlines that I had to meet. And now I had to write books that were even bigger than Forgetting Moon, and I had to do them fast. So then I was writing every day after work, every weekend. It just seemed like this thing that was hanging over my head all the time, where if I did something enjoyable that wasn't writing related, I felt guilty. Um, uh, so there's a lot of pressure to, and in a way though that helped. I think it helped me write better. Um, it certainly helped me write faster, because these books, each one of these books is 1,000 pages or more, and took me 2.5 years for each one. Um, I was under a 2-year deadline for each one. I missed each deadline by 6 months, but my publisher didn't seem to care. So, you know,
So you're writing every day. did you have like a word goal you wanted to do, or just like, okay, I have the scene I have to write? How is your writing process?
Um, there was no goals per every day. Wanted to get a chapter done, at least one chapter done every week if possible. If it was a longer chapter, maybe 2 weeks. Now my chapters run from everywhere between 7 pages to 30 pages. So, if I finished one of the shorter chapters in a week, I was like, yay. Um, well, some of the longer ones, were taking 2 or 3 weeks. So there was no, it was just if I'd get to work on a Saturday and the words were flowing with ease, I would just keep going until they weren't. So there were some days where I knocked out a lot of stuff, and then other days where I struggled and didn't accomplish much.
Hmm.
But that's gonna be typical for everybody. But I kind of knew that would happen because it's the same way that it was with my paintings. Painting was a lot like, it's a physical activity. It's an eye-hand coordination thing. And getting ready to do a painting was almost like prepping yourself to play a basketball game or a football game. You just kind of had to psych yourself out because you knew you were going to be involved in a physical activity for the rest of the day. And sometimes, like basketball players, sometimes they go into a game and every 3-point shot they throw up there, it goes right in the net.
Right.
It's unexplainable, right? And then the next game, they can't hit anything. It's just a brick after brick after brick. It's the same thing with painting. Like, you sit down and do a painting, and sometimes every brush stroke that you do is just magical. And then other days you feel like you're painting with the wrong end of the brush. You know what I mean? It just doesn't work. Same thing with writing. It can be the same thing. Sometimes every word seems to come to you automatically. The scenes just seem to flow out of the tips of your fingers into the computer. And then other days you're just like, you can't think of a word, that is right for the scene. And you can't think of a way to carry the scene forward, or you don't know what the characters are supposed to say in this part. And so you just sit there frustrated. But those days come and go. You never know which day you're going to get. You just keep going. You don't just say, the hell with it, I'm never writing again. If you have a bad day, you just, well, that was a bad day. Maybe tomorrow I'll make all my shots.
Right. And I love that analogy too, because if people are on their journey becoming an artist or an author or whatever, most of us have day jobs too. And this is a side job that we're trying to do. And just like your real job, there are days where everything goes right and there are days where everything goes wrong. So you kind of have to expect that in your writing journey, your artist journey, or whatever journey you want to do, whether that's blacksmithing or being a mechanic or whatever. Like, you just have to realize that there are going to be good days and bad days. So yeah, that's a great analogy. You have thick novels, 1,000 pages each. um how much do you outline, or do you outline, or do you, it'd be amazing if you were able to not outline and do that. I'd be super impressed.
Um, it's a little bit of both. I did a video on my YouTube channel. If you just go to my YouTube, well, you just type in my last name, Durfee, writing advice, and maybe the word outlines, and the video should come up just with those prompts. And it is about a 20-minute video of me explaining exactly how I keep my outlines going. And so in a nutshell, it's this. I Before I set out to write a book, I will open up a Word document, and at the top of each page, so I'll open up, and at the top of each page I'll put chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. So I'll have like 100 chapters, all right, in the document. So now I've got 100 pages opened up in the document. What just and at the top of the page, that's all that's listed is chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what I will do is my outline sort of grows on its own. If I think of something that will be good in the book, I'm like, okay, that scene might happen somewhere around chapter 34. So I will go ahead and type that into the page that says chapter 34. And I do this every day. I walk around with a notepad. Well, it's not a notepad. I walk around with a piece of paper. So anytime I have an idea, this is another thing that I tell people is if you've got an idea, I don't care how wild and crazy and stupid you think it might be, write it down on that piece of paper. And then every night I would get home and or every time I would open up my laptop to work on something, the first thing I would do is I'd take that piece of paper of all these notes I compiled during that day. And the notes could be an idea for a scene, a little snippet of dialogue between characters. Maybe I thought of a cool way to describe a misty forest, and so I wrote that down. I write all that stuff down on the paper during the day. And then when I open my document that I'm writing on, I just go to whatever chapter I think that those things will fit in, and I just put them there. And so I'm writing and creating the outline at the same time. So I will start in chapter 1 writing, but I've got all these other chapters filled with notes coming up. So then when I'm done with chapter 1, I go to chapter 2, and I've already got like several pages worth of notes that I've written for chapter 2. And then I do chapter 2, and by the time I get to the final chapters, I've got so many notes in those chapters, it's almost like the chapter's written already because I've kept adding to it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Do you, because stories have structure and different things, do you you have different sort of plot devices that you can use? Like I know there's Dan Harmon's story circle, or just a perfect, like just the traditional 3-act structure. Do you kind of have that in mind as you're writing, or do you just kind of go and the story concludes itself usually?
Yeah, the story, I just kind of do it the way I described it. There's no I don't have any structure to anything. In fact, every single one, I consider my trilogy one entire long novel, and it just kind of, each book sort of just abruptly ends. I tried to abruptly end each book with a bit of a cliffhanger or something like that, so there was kind of something there at the end, but it's not like um yeah, because it's probably because I didn't plan it very well. I had the whole story sort of planned, and I'm just like, well, I can't have a 5,000 page novel, so I'm gonna have to chop it somewhere to make it into smaller novels.
No,
um
that's amazing, and that's quite an effort to do as well as an outline. I'm really impressed, and I think that anybody can learn from that, to be able to be like, it doesn't have to be 100 chapters. It can be 25 or 30, whatever the story
yeah,
demands. But that, I think that's a great way. I think for myself, when I'm brainstorming and writing, some of my notes not necessarily get lost, but I think I can take your process and be like, oh, this might fit better here, instead of, you know, I have an idea, like instead of putting in the first chapter, like how can I build to that, and how can I move on from that?
yeah.
I think that's great advice.
Mhm.
So you were a fantasy and wildlife artist. Um, I've looked at some of your fantasy art, and for those who go on your website, they can look at both of them, and they'll find one painting in particular that looks very, very similar. You have a painting of a river with a ram, and a painting with a river with an elf lady on there. Um, so you're
Yeah.
able to use one and cover the other, or I don't know which one you did first.
Okay. So the original painting was a fantasy painting I did for Dungeons and Dragons, and it was a picture of a elf standing on a cliff with a waterfall. And so that painting was just sort of lounging around in my house, and I was like desperate for I had a show like a wildlife art show coming up, and I needed to do a painting real fast for it, and I'm like, I just don't have time. Oh, how about I paint this elf out of the scene and put a mountain goat up on that cliff with the waterfall, which is what I did. So it actually was, it was a painting that had served two purposes. Um, and it ended up selling. The gallery sold it, and I think even on the back of the painting, I put the a photo of the original fantasy elf, so the person that bought it could see what I'd done. Um, or maybe I didn't. I can't remember. I can't remember if I did that or not. I would just like, if some art restorer ever gets to that painting and tries to restore it, and they're like, wait a minute, there's an elf under this goat.
No, I think that's amazing, fantastic. But I was looking at your fantasy art, and you have a very traditional, like, I don't want to say 80s style, but like Larry Elmore, you mentioned the Hildebrandt
Yeah.
style to him. In fact, I was looking at one that I thought was a Larry Elmore. It's like so good. Um, uh, who I don't know if they're your influences, but who are some of your influences towards your fantasy art?
I think Elmore might have been the biggest one. Probably the brothers Hildebrandt, who did the Sword of Shannara book cover. The brothers Hildebrandt also, back in the late 1970s, they did all of the J.R.R. Tolkien artwork for all the calendars, any Lord of the Rings products. Back then, it was the brothers Hildebrandt that did those illustrations. So I liked them a lot. Larry Elmore and Keith Parkinson were probably two of my favorites. Um, but my all-time favorite fantasy artist was Michael Whalen. Uh, and so I tried to sort of, as a fantasy artist, I tried to have a style that was sort of, I guess, all of those combined. um, and another cool thing that happened was me and Larry Elmore were artist guests of honor at a convention in Utah back in 1999. And so I actually took Larry Elmore on a tour because he was in Utah, and he had a few days to spare and I was like, hey man, I can take you a tour. And we drove down through Moab and Capitol Reef and Bryce Canyon and Zion Canyon and the Grand Canyon. And so that was another cool thing, because Larry Elmore, when I was a kid, was another one of my heroes. And to be able to take him on a tour of Utah when I was an adult, straight out of college, I mean, that was right when I was out of college. That was pretty cool. So I've remained friends with him too.
That's awesome. You've met all your heroes, sounds like.
Just just happens, when you end up at these comic cons or these conventions, or when you're doing art shows, or you know you kind of make contacts here and there.
Right, which is important as an author too, and as an artist, if you're going that road too, is um, we this you haven't outright said this, but like networking is really important, and um knowing how to put yourself out there to be in these situations, like you have been, to where you can meet your heroes, or even if it's not your heroes, but somebody who can help you along your journey.
Yeah.
I think that's great. um so you are obviously a talented artist. Most people won't have this ability, but you probably could have chosen to do your own covers. What was some of the decisions of not doing that? I mean, your covers are fantastic. um I love them, but I don't know if you're out of practice or whatnot, but like you could have had this choice to do that.
Yeah, so years and years ago, and I made several videos about this subject on my YouTube channel, but I suffered some strokes in my left eye, which left me blind in my left eye, and I didn't know what was going on. I just noticed that I was having a hard time seeing, and my paintings were taking longer and longer. A painting I could normally do in a week was now taking me like a month and a half, and I was really struggling, and I just couldn't see very well. And well, long story short, it took me, because I'm stubborn. I'm like, oh, I probably just need a new prescription for my glasses, or maybe, you know, whatever is wrong with me, it'll just correct itself and go away. And so I really did the stupid thing and didn't go get my eyes checked out for years. But what it did was I just stopped painting because it was, the strain on my eyes was bad. It was painful. I couldn't see what the hell I was doing. Um, the paintings weren't as good. They were taking longer. And finally, when I went and got my eyes checked, they said, yeah, you've had strokes in your left eye, and that's why you've got these vision problems. And by that time, I was already kind of writing a lot. And I just lost every single ounce of passion that I ever had for painting.
Okay.
I just it almost like a light switch turned off. Like I had such a love for it and such a passion for it, and then it was just like gone. And but luckily, my passion for writing actually accelerated at the same time. And so I actually don't think of it as a negative. I think of it as a positive. So when it came time for the book covers, my publisher was aware of my artwork, and we did talk. And I just said, you know, I think that if I were to do it, it would not be very good. I would struggle with it. I'm out of practice. And even the stuff that I was doing towards the end of my art journey was sort of starting to look not that great. And there's so many magnificent illustrators out there now that I would be proud to have those guys on my cover. And then they said, well, who do you like? Which illustrators are your favorites? So I gave them 3 names, and they chose. One of the names was Richard Anderson. He was a new up and coming illustrator. I liked his style. It was unique. It was different than anything I'd seen, but I thought it was cool. And he was one of the people's names I gave them, and that's who they got.
That's amazing. You know, it's having these trials, you literally live the expression when, you know, when one door closes, another one opens. With
Yeah,
your, you know, that passion dropped and left you completely about painting, about art, and it literally just rose with writing. You know, and some people could have gone down a deep dark hole. You know, I love painting. You know, I can't do it anymore. So what am I going to do? But you rose above that, and you know, I know you've had some health issues lately, and again, you could have had that same reaction of I'm going to go down this deep dark hole, but
yeah,
it seems like you rose above it.
yeah. Well, the health issues continued, and it's mostly with my eyes because you know what, the issue I had with my left eye was a disease called retinal vein occlusion, which is basically strokes in your eye. And they say that only about 15% of the people that have stroke in one eye will ever have one in the other eye. And so I just kind of was like, oh yeah, well, that'll never happen to me. Those odds are pretty good. And then about 6 months ago, I had started to have strokes in my right eye too, because my vision was starting to go. And so that's where I am now. No, doctors give me no guarantees um, that the strokes I've had in my right eye will probably likely make me go blind in that eye too down the road. There's no cure for it. The only thing they can do is inject medicine into your eye. And I'm telling you, that ain't no joke. I mean, it's like an actual needle in your eye. And now
Right.
they're doing it into both eyes to keep because the strokes, what they do is those strokes will warp your retina. And once the retina is warped, you just can't see. And the medicine is supposed to limit the amount of damage the stroke does. It won't heal it, but it will stop the damage from spreading, ideally, in most people, but there's no guarantees. So
Right.
yeah, to this day, I can still just wake up one morning and not be able to see. It's just one of those things that I've gotten, but it's, you know, so another lesson for people, which I ignored my whole life, is your eating habits and your exercise. Um, they can, if you don't eat right, because I exercise. I actually was pretty good about lifting weights and exercising, but I ate nothing but garbage my whole life. And those things cause high blood pressure, and it's high blood pressure that causes strokes. And as a young person, people can tell you over and over and over, watch what you eat. Don't eat all that sugar. Stop drinking all that soda pop. Stop eating cheeseburgers and hot dogs and Dorito chips and Fritos for every meal. And because it'll catch up to you. And nobody told me that you might lose your vision at a young age because of your eating habits, but you can.
Right.
So
Nobody thinks of that.
that's just a warning to people that it can happen.
Yeah. No, that's great advice and a great public service announcement to for anybody. So you worked for Wizard of the Coast doing Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering, and how often do people come up with magic cards to have you sign at conventions?
Oh, all the time. Actually, I am, some of those illustrations I did for Magic the Gathering, I did them when I was so young and so not very good at artwork that I look at them and they make my eyes bleed, as if my eyes don't have enough problems. Looking at looking at some of my old artwork actually makes blood come out of my tear ducts. Because it's so painful to look at them. And I did a lot of those Magic the Gathering cards and a lot of the J.R.R. Tolkien cards, and I did Dune cards. I did some Wheel of Time cards. Just, in my opinion, horrible illustrations. I got so much better the older I got, but I'm still most famous for those Magic the Gathering cards. Every week I get fan mail from around the world with Magic cards in the mail to sign, like
That's
actual
amazing.
mail through them, and no emails, no none. I mean, like actual people actually mail them to my address,
Wow.
and I'm signing them all the time. Every week I've got a handful of Magic cards to sign and mail back to people. So a lot. It's staggering. I had no idea. If I would have known how popular those illustrations would have been, even as kind of ugly as I thought a lot of them were, I was just giving them away to friends, the actual original artwork back in the late 90s when I was doing it. And I was just giving the original artwork to people I didn't even know.
Oh,
And
really?
now those original pieces of art, those people that I gave them to are selling them on eBay for tens of thousands of dollars.
Oh, wow.
It's crazy. I
That's
wish I'd have
amazing.
kept all of it. I wish I'd
Oh,
have
yeah.
kept all of it. I had no idea.
Well, as a young kid, and granted, Magic the Gathering would have been like 6 or 7 years old. Like who knows what's going to happen? It could have faded. It could have done anything. So,
Yeah,
you just don't know.
yeah. When I was doing work for Magic the Gathering and Wizards of the Coast, those cards, they were still not that popular. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like really in the infancy of that company. And I honestly was naive. I was like, oh, this won't go anywhere. That's kind of why I didn't do my best work.
How did that relationship start?
um I got my art degree from BYU, and there was another girl that was a BYU that had started doing some illustrations for the I don't know if she was a BYU student or a UVU, whatever that other college is in Utah County, but her name was Nene Thomas. I think that was her name. But I met her at BYU, and she was telling me about these illustrations that she was doing for this Magic the Gathering company, and that they paid pretty well, and that she saw my artwork, and she's like, you should probably hit him up and see if you can do some work. And so I did. I just literally sent them a letter with like a couple of little postage sized photos of my work, that my portfolio was so amateurish. It was just like a letter and I just took a photo of my paintings with a camera and took it to the 1 hour photo and had them, and literally that was it. They were like, hey, those are pretty cool.
Oh, really?
We'll give you some work. Yeah. But
Nice.
then again, it was back when magic wasn't that popular. I mean, I don't think anybody was really hitting them up for illustrations. Like nowadays, that's like a really prestigious gig to get if you're an artist, is to get on a magic card
Yeah.
nowadays. Back then, I think they were begging just anybody
Oh,
to do a
really?
drawing for. Yeah.
No, that's amazing. That that's all it took back then was send in your photos. And like, kids, if you're listening to this, you don't know what it was like back in the 90s to have to develop film, like take it somewhere and develop film and be able to
Yeah.
snail mail it somewhere, and how long that actually took.
Yeah. Oh, and that those photographs you took, whatever color quality or lighting you had, that's what you had to live with.
Yeah, that was
I
it.
mean, you could not fix that in your computer or even on my phone. I take a photo now and on my phone, I can do all sorts of editing to that photo to make it look snazzy.
Right.
None of that. None of that. It was just these weird, washed out, faded looking. The color was all off. And that's what I just sent them, those horrid looking photos. And they're like, hey, here's some assignments for you. We'll pay you this much money for it.
That's fantastic. Now you do something else, and you've talked about your YouTube channel. What made you decide to start doing reviews and doing stuff on YouTube?
Um, One of the reasons was I had a lot of friends that did that early on with the internet. They would do a website, and they would do a weekly blog where they would write. And I just noticed how frustrated they would get that nobody was looking at their stuff, that nobody was finding their stuff on their websites or their blogs. And then YouTube, of course. And I wish this, if I have one thing to do over in life, I would have started my YouTube channel 10 years prior to when I started it, because I only started it 2 years ago.
Right.
But I thought, I was watching a couple of YouTubers that were reviewing books, and I enjoyed what they were saying, and I enjoyed I kept going back to their channels, and I'm like, well, hell, I could probably do that. And so I just said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give myself 1 year. I'm going to post a video of some kind every day for a year. I watched some YouTube tutorial videos. Like, if you go to YouTube and type in how to start a YouTube channel, you're going to have thousands of videos teaching you how to do it. And so I watched a bunch of those, and I'm like, okay, this seems like it's going to be pretty simple. This is something I can just do with my phone. I can review books. I can give writing advice. I'm reading the books anyway. Just point the phone at my face and shoot a 10-minute review. That's not going to be that much effort, right? And so I said, if I do that and I post one video per day for a year, I'll see where I'm at. And I thought, I'll be lucky to get 200 subscribers in a year. I ended up with, like, I think that first year, close to well, maybe it was 6,000 subscribers. Now I've got like 12,000 or more in 2 years. So, I don't know if that's a fast growing channel or a slow growing channel, but I've seen the numbers rise, and then
It's
they
a
pay
growing
me.
channel.
Yeah, they pay me for it. And I'll be honest, it's more money than I thought it would be. Once they monetize your channel, it's
Uh-huh.
like, it's more money than I thought it would be. And so now I get this audience, which has kept the sales of my books pretty steady, just because I'm in people's faces every day, or I'm on the YouTube. And so it's actually helped the sales of my books, and it's helped get my name out there more. And whereas if I would have just stuck to a website and a blog or written blog, which was all the rage, 15 years ago,
Hmm.
I would just be like my friends, just probably the cat again. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Probably just struggling and frustrated that not much traffic was going through. YouTube is where it's at. Um, I would suggest if you're a writer and you want to gain a following, um, even before you get published, just get yourself a TikTok. I don't have TikTok, but that's the big rage now. Get yourself a TikTok, an Instagram, a Facebook, a YouTube channel. Just put content out there every day and people will find it. And if you just want to review books or talk about books or show your book collection, or maybe you don't even need to do anything with books. Maybe you like to build bookshelves. Maybe you're a carpenter. Maybe you like woodworking. Maybe you like fly fishing. Maybe you like flying your drone or driving your dirt bike. Just put something out there every day and people will start following you. You'd be surprised. As long as you're authentic and have a passion for it, people will follow you.
I think YouTube, Instagram, I think those 5 social media platforms that you mentioned are very key to anybody that wants to create a following.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest, my publishers noticed. My publisher knows that that my following is growing, and I think it helps your standing in the community if they can see a noticeable interest in you. Like my publisher's like, oh yeah, this guy, he has a voice in the community now. He can influence things.
Right.
And so it adds a bit of leverage to whatever you're doing. Uh and it's important. I think it's important to just if you want to go that route, it's not going to be for everybody. Not everybody wants to stand in front of a camera and act like a goofball like I do sometimes, and say stuff. I've always tried to keep my channel positive. I don't give negative reviews of books. I want to promote reading and I want to promote my own love of books. And so that's what I do. If there's a book I don't like, it never gets mentioned on my channel. Every book that I mention on my channel is going to get a good review. And if it seems like I'm kind of knocking a book, because once in a while I'll like be critical of some stuff, but it's not like I'm being critical of the book. I'm being critical of myself for not understanding the book. And I'll make that very plain and evident. I'll be like, well, I'm an idiot because this and that and the other thing was going on in a book, but I was such an idiot, I didn't really figure it out until. So I'll try to poke fun of myself before I ever try to poke fun of anybody's writing.
Right. No, and that's for anybody that wanting to do something like that. That's great advice too. Is keep it positive and being able to have the restraint to not mention a book if you don't like it. Because what I like might not be what Brian likes. What Brian likes might not be what I like. But if you read a book and you don't like it, there's going to be somebody that does. So why be negative and have that person that might like it be turned off of it because of what you said?
I think that Goodreads, that website Goodreads, I think that Amazon reviews, I actually think and I've talked to other authors about this, I think that those 2 websites and the review system has done more damage to books than good. Because people look for any excuse not to like something.
Right.
Before Goodreads existed, before Amazon.com reviews existed, and they've only existed for the last 15, 20 years. Before that, people actually had to go into the bookstore, look at the back of a book, and decide right then and there if it was something they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And more books were purchased based off of that.
Yeah.
Now they go into a bookstore, they look at a book. Before they decide if it's something they want to buy, they'll go look at its Goodreads ratings or its Amazon ratings. They'll read some negative reviews. or they'll read positive reviews. There's so many reviews, they'll just read a handful of those reviews and they'll find something in those reviews that they don't like. And even, I guess, my own review channel on YouTube would be guilty of that, because even though I'm giving positive reviews, even in that positive review, I might be saying something about the book that someone's going to be like, oh, that book has elves in it. I hate books with elves and dwarves. I'm not going to get that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But at the same time, they're not going to enjoy that book if they don't like elves anyway. So
Yeah.
maybe you gave them fair warning that there's going to be elves in it.
Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of Goodreads, even though I'm on it. And I think there's a lot of trolls. A lot of trolls show up there.
Right.
And then just be obnoxious.
That is true. Brian, thank you so much. Is there any, it sounds like you've met a lot of your heroes. Is there anybody else that, you'd kind of fangirl over if you met them?
Yeah, there's two people I've always wanted to meet. Now, one of them I've been in the same room, I just never got to talk to, and that was Stephen King. So one of my heroes that I want to meet and actually have a conversation with is Stephen King, but I have not talked to him yet. But I have been in the same room as him. The other one is really out of the blue, but do you ever watch Rick Steves' Travels in Europe on PBS? His Travels in Europe show?
I know the show. I have not watched it though, but I know the show.
I don't know why, but I just want to meet that guy because he inspired me to I take a trip to Europe every summer. And I don't think I would have done that. It's one of the joys of my life. I don't think I would have ever done that if I hadn't watched his shows.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And I don't know. I like his shows. I like his Travels in Europe shows. I've seen a lot of European stuff because he had it in his show.
That's awesome. So next book's coming out November 29th, correct?
Yeah.
Go ahead and tell everybody how they can get a hold of you, social media tags, and to look for that book November 29th.
Okay. It's easy to find me on social media. Brian Lee Durfee. That is what I'm listed under everything. Twitter is Brian Lee Durfee. Facebook, Brian Lee Durfee. Instagram, Brian Lee Durfee. My YouTube channel is Brian Lee Durfee. My website is Brian Lee Durfee.
Your signature is not though.
No, my signature is.
You have the best signature, by the way.
Yeah, my signature is also on the internet. I will let you guys Google it and find out what it is like for yourselves.
That's awesome. Brian, thank you so much for getting on with me. I can't wait till November 29th. I look forward to reading the third book. So thank you very much for getting on with me.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Troy Podcast. Please subscribe, like, and share with your friends.